The moment he saw the figure struggling in the tide, his heart leapt. At first, it looked like wreckage, wood from a ship torn apart, perhaps. Then the shape moved, and he realized it was a person. Einar dropped his net and sprinted, plunging into the frigid surf without hesitation. The body belonged to a woman. Her lips were blue from the cold, her eyelids heavy, and her breath shallow. Einar gritted his teeth, hauling her up out of the waves, half carrying, half dragging her back to shore. She coughed violently, sea water spilling from her mouth, before collapsing against his chest. "Easy now," he murmured, cradling her head. His voice was rough from years of shouting over storms. "You're safe. Breathe, just breathe." Her eyes fluttered open, startling, clear gray, like polished steel, and for a moment they locked with his. There was pride there, even in her weakness, something untamed that made him falter. He didn't know it then, but this woman was no ordinary castaway. He carried her to his cottage, a humble place of timber and stone, built into the cliffs above the sea. Inside, he wrapped her in furs, stoked the fire high, and gave her warm broth. Slowly, color returned to her cheeks. Still, she said little. She watched him closely, studying the rough lines of his hands, the way he moved with quiet determination. It wasn't until nightfall that she finally spoke. "You saved me," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "I," he replied, setting down the wooden bowl. "Anyone would've." "Not anyone," she countered, her eyes narrowing. "Some might have left me for the tide." Einar shrugged, uncomfortable under her gaze. "I'm not some." Her lips curved, the faintest trace of a smile. That night, when she slept, Einar found himself staring at her face in the firelight. She carried herself differently, even unconscious. The way she clenched her jaw, the way her hands rested, like someone used to command. She was no fisher's daughter, no simple villager. He knew that much. But he didn't press her with questions. The truth revealed itself soon enough. 3 days later, a company of horsemen arrived at the village. Their armor gleamed, their banners snapping in the wind, a golden wolf embroidered on deep green cloth. The villagers shrank back in awe as the riders thundered through the muddy streets, demanding to know where their sovereign had been taken. Einar's blood ran cold when the leader pointed straight at his cottage. And then, before the gathered crowd, the woman stepped out. Her hair was now braided and crowned with a simple band of gold. Her furs hung across her shoulders like a mantle. The villagers dropped to their knees, stunned into silence. Einar stood frozen, staring at her. She looked back at him, her chin lifting with quiet strength. "I am Astrid, King of Vinland." Her voice rang clear, carrying over the crowd. "And this man, this fisherman, saved my life." The words hit him like a hammer. King. Not queen. King. The chosen title of rulers in her bloodline, regardless of their sex. Astrid's eyes softened as they lingered on him, and Einar realized with a start that he wanted her to keep looking at him like that forever. But the moment passed. The soldiers swept her away, ushering her toward the capital, while Einar stood in the mud, heart pounding, hands trembling. He had touched the untouchable, and worse, he could not stop thinking of her. The days that followed were restless. Einar tried to return to fishing, but his thoughts were filled with Astrid, her voice, her gaze, the way her hand had briefly brushed his when he handed her broth. He told himself it was foolishness. She was royalty, and he was less than nothing. But when an envoy arrived with orders to bring him to the palace, he could no longer deny that their paths were tangled. The capital of Vinland was unlike anything Einar had ever seen, towering wooden halls carved with dragon motifs, markets overflowing with goods from distant lands, the scent of roasted meats and spiced wine thick in the air. Yet he could not enjoy it, for every step deeper into the palace brought a weight of dread. And then, at last, he saw her again. Astrid stood at the center of the great hall, cloaked in green and gold, a circlet upon her brow. She smiled when she saw him, stepping forward, ignoring the scandalized whispers of her counselors. "You came," she said, her voice warm, almost tender. Einar bowed clumsily. "I was summoned, my king." Her smile deepened. "Astrid," she corrected softly. "To you, I am Astrid." His chest tightened. For a heartbeat, it felt like they were alone, the hall dissolving around them. But the spell broke when another voice cut through the chamber, deep, commanding, and filled with thunder. "You forget yourself, daughter." The crowd parted as an older man strode forward, King Harald, Astrid's father, once ruler of Vinland and still a figure of immense authority. Harald, late 50s, towering, silver hair braided down his back, a scar splitting his cheek, eyes like cold fire. He looked Einar up and down with disdain. "A peasant fisherman," Harald spat, his voice carrying for all to hear. "This is the man you bring into my hall? The one who dares meet your eyes?" Astrid's jaw tightened. "He saved my life. He will not take it," Harald thundered. His gaze turned to Einar, sharp as a blade. "Know your place, boy. You stand before a throne you will never touch. If you value your miserable life, you will stay away from my daughter." The hall fell silent. Einar's breath caught in his chest, his heart thundering. He felt Astrid's eyes on him, heavy with something unspoken, defiance, longing, maybe even fear. And in that moment, Einar knew, no matter the danger, no matter the king's wrath, he could not walk away from her. The great hall still echoed with Harald's words, their weight pressing down on Einar like the stones of the palace itself. He stood frozen, fists clenched at his sides, torn between anger and the instinct to bow his head. The eyes of nobles and guards bore into him, some mocking, others wary, all of them waiting to see whether the fisherman would crumble or defy a king. Astrid stepped closer, her skirts whispering across the polished wood, and laid a hand on Einar's arm. The gesture was small, but in that silence it was thunder. "Father," she said, her voice calm but carrying a steel edge. "You forget yourself. Without this man, I would be dead on the rocks. Would you have me dishonor him for his birth when the gods themselves spared me through his hands?" Harald's gaze flicked to her, hard as ice. "Honor him. A peasant's honor is his work and his bread. He needs nothing more." His eyes slashed back to Einar. "And he will have nothing more. Do you hear me, boy?" "I hear you," Einar said, his voice low but steady. The hall murmured. It wasn't deference, nor was it defiance, it was something in between. A tone that suggested he had heard, but not agreed. Astrid's grip on his arm tightened before she released him and stepped back, her face a careful mask. She turned to the court. "Enough. The fisherman is my guest, and he will be treated with respect under this roof. Let any who think otherwise answer to me." The nobles bowed reluctantly. Harald did not. He stared at his daughter a moment longer, then swept his cloak about him and stormed from the hall, his guards following. The doors slammed shut behind him, and the room exhaled as though released from a noose. Astrid turned back to Einar, her eyes softer now, though the corners of her mouth still trembled with controlled fury. "Forgive him," she murmured. "He is proud, and he thinks pride can guard me better than kindness ever could." Einar swallowed. "I don't need his forgiveness. I didn't come here for him." Her gaze lingered on him, and though she said nothing, the fire in her eyes answered enough. That night, Einar was given quarters within the palace walls, a small room overlooking the torchlit courtyards. The furs on the bed were softer than any he had ever touched, yet he lay awake, staring at the beams of the ceiling. He could still feel Astrid's hand on his arm, could still hear the fury in Harald's voice. He rose before dawn, as he always had by the sea, and wandered the empty corridors until he found himself in the gardens. Mist clung to the hedges and statues, and the scent of damp earth filled the air. He thought himself alone until a voice broke the quiet. "You walk the palace like a man lost in a storm." Astrid emerged from the mist, cloaked in a deep blue mantle, her hair braided with silver threads. She looked less a ruler now and more a woman seeking a moment's peace. "I couldn't sleep," Einar admitted. "Nor I," she said, stepping closer. "My father's words cut deeper than he knows." They stood in silence a moment, the mist curling around them. Then Astrid spoke again, softer. "Do you regret saving me, Einar?" The question struck him like a spear. "Never," he said without hesitation. Her lips parted, a sharp breath catching, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt two lives, two worlds, brushing against each other where they never should. Astrid lifted her hand as though to touch his cheek, but stopped, fingers trembling in the air. She began, but her words were broken by the sound of boots on gravel. They sprang apart as a guard rounded the corner, bowing hastily. "My king, your father summons you." Astrid straightened, her expression once again carved from stone. "Tell him I will come shortly." The guard nodded and withdrew. When he was gone, Astrid turned back to Einar, her jaw set. "He will not rest. He will find ways to tear us apart. You must be careful." Einar's chest tightened. "And you? What of you?" Her eyes softened, shadows dancing in them. "I have never been careful. Not with my heart." And then she was gone, vanishing into the mist, leaving Einar standing alone in the garden, his heart thundering in his chest, knowing he was already far too deep to turn back. The following weeks were a war of silence. Astrid's duties chained her to the throne, council meetings, audiences, negotiations with foreign envoys. Einar saw her only in passing, a glance across the hall, a fleeting smile in the market square when she rode through on horseback. But each moment, however brief, carved deeper into him. And Harald watched. The old king was no fool. He saw the way his daughter's eyes followed the fisherman, saw how the boy's presence unsettled her composure. He called Einar to him one evening, not in the throne room, but in the old war hall, its walls hung with shields and swords of past battles. Harald stood by the fire, his great frame casting a long shadow. He did not turn when Einar entered. "Do you know what it is to love a king's child?" he asked, his voice low. Einar froze. "No, my lord." Harald turned then, his eyes blazing. "It is to invite ruin. For her, for you, for the realm. You are a fisherman, Einar. Salt and nets are your world. But she is the blood of kings, the spine of this land. If you dare set your heart upon her, you will break her with it. And I will not allow it." Einar clenched his fists. "I did not ask for this." "No," Harald said, stepping closer, his scarred face inches from his. "But you must end it. Whatever lingers in her heart, you will kill it, or I will kill you." The fire cracked, shadows leaping across the hall. Einar's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He could not promise to give up Astrid, yet he could not defy the old king outright. When Harald left, Einar remained by the fire, staring into its heart until the flames blurred. He had never feared storms, never feared the sea. But Harald's words weighed heavier than any wave he had ever faced. And still, when he closed his eyes, all he saw was Astrid's hand reaching for his in the mist. That night, Einar returned to his chamber, but rest refused him. He lay on the furs, his body heavy but his mind ablaze. Harald's words echoed over and over, each one a stone dragging him beneath the tide. "Kill it, or I will kill you." He had faced storms that could swallow boats whole, wolves in the forests that circled hungry, winters that starved entire villages. None of those things had frightened him as much as the thought of Astrid standing alone, her eyes burning with defiance, while her own father plotted to keep her chained to duty and cold alliances. By dawn, he could bear it no longer. He left his quarters and sought the solace of the stables, where the smell of hay and horses reminded him faintly of simpler life in the village. He sat on a bale, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground. "Do you mean to hide here forever?" The voice startled him. Astrid stood in the doorway, cloaked against the morning chill, her hair unbound and falling in black waves about her shoulders. The stable boy had slipped out silently, leaving them alone. "I didn't think you'd come," Einar said, rising. She smiled faintly. "You think I would let my father's threats keep me from you?" He stiffened. "So you know." "I know him," she said simply, stepping closer. "I saw his face when he summoned you. I can guess his words." Her gaze searched his, and her voice softened. "Tell me, Einar, do you fear him?" "I fear losing you," he confessed, the words raw, stripped of hesitation. "But if I step closer, I bring ruin to you. And if I step away, I ruin myself." Astrid's hand lifted to his chest, resting over the hammer of his heartbeat. "Then let us both be ruined, if that is what it means to be free." For a long moment, neither moved. The air between them burned with the weight of unspoken choices, until at last, Einar's hand closed over hers. Their lips met, hesitant at first, then fierce, as though they could steal from each other what the world denied. When they parted, Astrid's breath trembled. "You must leave this place tonight," she whispered. "Meet me at the old harbor after the moon has risen." If we stay, my father will destroy us both. Einar frowned. Leave. And abandon your crown? Her eyes flared. A crown is not life. It is chains. Would you have me wear it while I rot inside these walls? He stared at her, torn. The thought of Astrid casting aside her throne for him was both intoxicating and terrifying. But before he could speak, shouts rose outside the stable. Astrid stiffened, her hand dropping from his chest. The doors burst open, and soldiers flooded in, Harald's men, armed and grim. Their captain's eyes narrowed. By order of the king, he barked, the fisherman is to be confined. The king grows tired of his shadow haunting the halls. Astrid stepped forward, her chin high. You dare touch him in my presence? The captain hesitated, torn between loyalty to Astrid and obedience to Harald. But Harald's command was iron, and the men closed in. Einar clenched his fists, ready to fight, but Astrid's hand brushed his arm, a silent plea. Go with them, she whispered fiercely. Trust me. Tonight, the harbor. I will find a way. His chest ached as the soldiers seized him, dragging him from the stables. He caught one last glimpse of Astrid, her grey eyes blazing with defiance and sorrow, before the palace gates swallowed him whole. The cell was cold, carved into the underbelly of the palace like a wound. Damp stone walls dripped, and a single torch sputtered in the corridor outside. Einar sat against the wall, chains biting into his wrists, his mind racing. He could hear the guards muttering, laughing, speaking of him as though he were already dead. But above the noise, he heard another sound, the faintest scrape, the whisper of movement. From the shadows at the far end of the cell, a cloaked figure appeared, face hidden beneath a hood. Einar tensed, expecting another soldier. But when the torchlight caught the figure's face, his breath caught. It was not Astrid. It was a woman he had never seen before, with striking green eyes and a scar curling down her cheek. You're Einar, she said in a low voice. The one the king fears. I don't fear him, Einar muttered. A sharp smile touched her lips. Good. Then perhaps you'll hear me. Astrid is not the only one who despises her father's chains. There are those in this palace who would see the old wolf brought low. And you may be the spark we need. Einar's brow furrowed. Who are you? The woman pulled back her hood. Ingrid. Captain of the king's own guard. His heart jolted. If even the captain stood against Harald, then the old king's grip was slipping. But what did that mean for Astrid, for them? Before he could ask, Ingrid stepped closer, her voice fierce. You want Astrid? Then listen well, fisherman. Tonight, the palace will bleed. Choose where you stand. Einar stared at Ingrid, his pulse hammering in his ears. She stood tall, steady as stone, her green eyes blazing with conviction. In the dim torchlight, she looked every bit the warrior she claimed to be, and yet there was something dangerous in her presence, a storm waiting to break. You speak of bleeding, Einar said slowly, his voice echoing off the damp walls. Do you mean rebellion? Ingrid's scarred mouth curved into a half-smile. Call it what you like. Harald's time has passed. He clings to power through fear, through threats and chains. But there are many soldiers, nobles, even common folk who would see Astrid rule unfettered. And with her, a new future. Einar's stomach tightened. He thought of Astrid in the gardens, her hand trembling as she almost touched his face, her whispered words, I have never been careful. Not with my heart. He had not come here to topple kings or stoke rebellion. Yet here he was, a fisherman tangled in the fate of a realm. If Astrid is meant to rule, then let her, Einar said. Why do you need me? Ingrid's eyes sharpened. Because she listens to you. She trusts you more than anyone. And that frightens her father more than an army ever could. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. He means to marry her to a foreign lord before the month is out. A bargain of land and steel. If that happens, Astrid's heart will be caged forever. The words hit like a blade to the chest. Einar felt heat surge through him, rage, fear, longing all tangled. And you would stop this. I would see Astrid free to choose her own path, Ingrid said. But I cannot do it alone. Tonight, when the feast begins, Harald will be vulnerable. His enemies are waiting for a signal. You, fisherman, are that signal. All you need to do is stand with her, openly, before the court. The rest will follow. Einar's breath caught. To stand with Astrid was to declare war on Harald. To do nothing was to watch her chained to another man. He clenched his fists, feeling the bite of the iron shackles. Then unchain me, he growled. Ingrid's smile widened. I thought you might say that. With a swift motion, she drew a key from her cloak and unlocked his bindings. The chains fell with a heavy clang. Tonight, fisherman, she whispered, stepping back into the shadows. Choose love, or choose silence. Either way, Vinland will never be the same. And then she was gone. The palace roared with life that evening. The great hall was ablaze with torchlight and song, long tables groaning beneath roasted boar, fresh bread, and horns of mead. Nobles laughed too loudly, their jewels glittering, while guards in polished armor lined the walls. At the head of it all sat Harald, his silver hair gleaming, his scarred face carved into a permanent scowl. Beside him sat Astrid, dressed in green and gold, her circlet gleaming. She looked every bit a king, her back straight, her chin high, but her grey eyes were shadowed, darting once toward the empty space where Einar should have been. Until the doors opened. The hall fell to murmurs as Einar entered, flanked by 2 guards who pretended to escort him but carried no chains. He wore no finery, only the plain tunic and boots of a fisherman, but his shoulders were square, his stride steady. His eyes sought Astrid's, and when they met, it was as though the whole hall disappeared. Harald slammed his fist against the table. What is this? He thundered. Why bring this wretch before me during my feast? Astrid rose before anyone could answer. Because he is no wretch. He is the man who saved me, the man who risked his life when others would have turned away. And I will not let him be silenced. The nobles erupted in whispers, some scandalized, others intrigued. Harald's face darkened. Daughter, you shame yourself. He pointed at Einar, his voice booming. You dare stand in my hall as though you belong? Speak your purpose, boy, before I have you dragged out and drowned. Einar's throat burned, but his voice came steady. My purpose is Astrid. I will not leave her side. Gasps rippled through the court. Astrid's lips parted, her breath catching as though the words had struck her heart. Harald's eyes blazed like a storm. You speak of love, fisherman? You think yourself fit to touch what belongs to a king? He rose to his full, towering height, hand going to the hilt of his sword. Then you will die for your folly. The hall erupted, guards rushing forward, nobles shouting. But in that chaos, something else stirred. Ingrid stepped into the torchlight, her blade drawn. Not tonight, old wolf, she declared. Your reign ends here. Dozens of soldiers cast off their cloaks, revealing hidden weapons. Shouts of rebellion split the air, steel clashing against steel as the great hall descended into battle. Einar barely had time to draw a dagger from a fallen guard before Harald was upon him, his blade sweeping in a deadly arc. Einar ducked, the strike grazing his shoulder, pain flaring. He fought back, clumsy but fueled by fire, each clash of steel ringing in his bones. Astrid seized a spear from the wall and fought at his side, her face fierce, her braids whipping as she drove back her father's loyalists. They moved together as if bound by something deeper than blood, each step, each strike, in unison. Traitor! Harald roared, his blade sparking against Einar's dagger. You would choose a peasant over your blood. Astrid's voice rang clear above the chaos. I choose my heart. The hall froze at her words, just for a breath, just long enough. Einar lunged, driving Harald back with a desperate shove. But the old king was a warrior born. With a snarl, he struck Einar across the jaw, sending him sprawling. Harald raised his sword for the killing blow. And Astrid stepped between them. Her spear caught his blade mid-swing, the clash of metal deafening. Father and daughter locked eyes, grey steel against cold fire. This ends, she said, her voice trembling but unyielding. Your rule, your chains, your hatred. Tonight it ends. For a heartbeat, Harald faltered. Then, with a roar, he shoved her back, fury consuming him. But Ingrid was there, her sword driving through his guard, striking deep. The old king gasped, his blade slipping from his hand, before collapsing to the stone floor. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of torches and the ragged breaths of the living. Harold lay still. Astrid stood trembling, her spear shaking in her grip. Then she let it fall, turning to Einar. He rose slowly, blood on his lip, his body aching, but his eyes never left hers. The nobles watched, waiting, the fate of Vinland hanging in the balance. Astrid lifted her chin, her voice carrying through the hall. The old king is gone. Vinland is free. And I will not rule in chains. She turned to Einar, her hand reaching for his. And before the eyes of her people, she declared, "This man is no peasant. He is my equal, my chosen, my heart." The hall erupted, some in outrage, others in cheers. But Astrid did not waver, and neither did Einar. They stood together, hand in hand, as the realm shifted around them. In the days that followed, the kingdom of Vinland trembled with change. Harold's loyalists grumbled, some fled, others bent the knee to Astrid. Ingrid was named captain still, her loyalty proven. And Astrid ruled not as her father had, through fear, but with a vision of freedom and strength. At her side, always, stood Einar. No crown adorned his head, no title clung to his name. He was still a fisherman at heart, but one who had weathered storms greater than any sea could conjure. And in Astrid's eyes, he saw no disdain, no pity, only love. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the horizon, Astrid and Einar stood upon the cliffs where they had first met. The sea roared below, wild and endless. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "All that has come, all that may still come?" Einar shook his head, his arm wrapping around her shoulders. "The sea taught me long ago, you cannot fear the storm if you mean to sail. I have no regrets." Astrid smiled, leaning into him, her crown catching the dying light. "Then let us sail together."